Hello, everybody. Welcome to SoundWave, where we are changing and transforming the world, our workplaces, our communities, one voice at a time. Welcome to Own Your Conversation. This series is created just for everyone who wants to learn everything about what SoundWave is all about, the strategies, the tips, the tricks, and how to skillfully use our voices to target our talk and engage people around us. And as we say here at SoundWave, amazing things happen between people when the quality of the conversation is good. And when that happens, we are able to shift the dialogue, change the conversation, and shape the outcomes and the culture that we want. My name is Kim Pong, and I am the global partner of SoundWave. And together with me hosting this program, over the last few episodes is none other than the creator, Mr. Soundwave himself, Kevin. A very good morning to you, and it feels kind of rather cold where you're calling in from. Kevin, how are you doing?
Yeah, Kim Pong, hi, good morning to you. I'm good. I've fallen out of bed, and this is always a good thing to come to first thing in the morning. And proof that I'm falling out of bed, Englishmen always go to bed in a waistcoat and a jacket. So it was easy to get here first thing this morning. And I've really enjoyed the last 3 sessions we've had. I'm looking forward to this one very much.
Amazing, right? So for those of you who are watching the program right now, you are actually, watching the SoundWave Own Your Conversation channel. And this is a 10-part series on the 9 verbal strategies of SoundWave, or as we call them here, the 9 voices, of our SoundWave. And today we are focusing on the suggest cluster. And we are talking specifically about the voice of articulate. And before we do that, really, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. And if you really want us to, send notifications to you every time we post a new episode, go ahead, click on the bell, and every time we post a new episode, bam, right? You're gonna get that episode, announcement right in your email. So with that, let's get started. And once again, I want to start, Kevin, this morning with a quote. And the quote is from a poet by the name of Thomas Sowell. And he said this: talkers are usually more articulate than doers, since talk is their specialty. So my first question to you is this: is the voice of articulate misunderstood here? And what exactly is the voice of articulate? Over to you, Kevin.
I love the way you start with these quotations, Kim Pong, largely because I never know what they're going to be. So I hear them for the first time. I like that. Tell me, I didn't quite catch it first time. Who is the poet in question?
So the name of the poet, his name is called Thomas Sowell, Sowell. And he said this: talkers are usually more articulate than doers, since talk is their specialty.
Okay, so this is going to be a very indirect answer to your question, first of all. But I love the idea of talk being a specialty. I think that's important. Not so much just with the voice of articulate, but generally speaking. We've got this old refrain, which I'm sure is a global refrain, which is, a little less talk and rather more action.
Yeah.
But as we talked about before, the talk is the action. Nothing gets done. Nothing gets done anywhere without people talking. And of course, being articulate is an important thing, because being articulate is about being persuasive. But I'll answer your question, Kim Pong, by saying that being articulate and the voice of to articulate, are not quite the same thing. So somebody is articulate when they can express themselves clearly, but the voice to articulate is about narration. It's about storytelling. It's about being able to express or explain an idea in a way that gently grabs somebody's attention. Okay, so that's the way I tend to think about the voice of articulate. What's your understanding of it?
Well, I think pretty much, what it is, as you mentioned. I love what you said, something about, that talk is action. But I think for me, articulate is really that voice. Well, see, the funny thing is this, right? In my own top 3 voices, I think it's probably my number 4th or my number 5th voice. Before I understood my sound wave, I hardly noticed, using the articulate voice. But, ever since I understood what my sound wave is all about, and I begin to say, hey, let's use the articulate voice here, let's use the articulate voice there, it's given me quite a bit of insight into actually grabbing the attention of people. When I use the articulate voice, for some strange reason, it's almost like time will stand still for a moment, and you kind of see people kind of locking eyes with you and go like, yeah, That's exactly what I just said, right? So you're right. It's not about being articulate in the way I talk, but it's about, it's about the storytelling. It's about the recitation. It's about the dictation that I'm capable of. Now, in Soundwave, we often describe the articulate voice as the voice of influence. Give us some insight on that. Why do we do that? Why do we call, articulate that voice of influence, that voice of ownership?
Okay, so I really like what you've said there, Kim Pong. I think the problem, as it were, with the voice to articulate is that it's around us all the time. When we meet up with friends and we have a cup of coffee and we're talking about what happened in our day or the at our home, this is the voice of articulation. It's the simple narration, the simple storytelling or explanation of what has happened. And human beings do this all the time, so we don't really think about it. It's just there. But in a more technical sense, the reason it's an influencer as a voice, and I like to think of it as a quiet influencer, because it's understated. When I'm listening to a conversation around me and a couple of people say something, and I want to summarize what somebody said, make sure that I've understood what they've said, or make sure the parties together have understood each other, then I will articulate, I will play back what I've heard. In coaching terms, we talk about the skill of summarizing. And the thing is that when I do that, or when somebody does that, what happens is that people slow down. They calm down, they listen a little more closely. And so the energy level relaxes a bit and people start to pay more attention and they listen a little better. And so this is why it's such an influential voice. And you think about the good chairperson who listens to a complex conversation and manages to pull out the key points in it. Well, the reason that they're doing that is because they're enabling other people. The voice to articulate is there to support other people in understanding, rather than a pronouncement about myself and what is important to me. I mean, that's more the voice of advocacy, and we'll come on to that later in this series. But articulation, I think I'm really pleased you've picked out the theme that to articulate is to influence, because I think that's fundamentally what it does. Although it influences indirectly, it doesn't sort of set out to influence in a way that an impactful advocate would. It sets out to enable understanding, and because of that, it happens to carry influence for the person who's using it.
Love it. Let's talk about some metaphors that describe a lot more visually of what the voice of articulate look like, sound like, and feel like to us, right? What would be some metaphors to describe articulate here?
Well, I've got a couple. The one which we may have used for other voices, but anyway, it's still relevant here, is the bridge, because that's what it does. Articulation pulls people together. But I think the one I prefer, although it's messy and sticky, is glue. I think what articulation provides, or the voice to articulate, is a stickiness that pulls people in and temporarily at least binds them together around a particular idea or a particular issue. It's very socially focused, I think, this voice. Not about the I, it's more to do with the we. And I think that's a really important part of understanding the relevance of this voice.
I love the term that you just used, socially focused, right? And that is so true, because that's what I experience, very often when I use the articulate voice intentionally in the midst of a conversation. It's like all of a sudden, it's no longer just about what I'm trying to say here. It's about what I'm trying to do in response to what you have actually told me, what you've actually challenged me or just described to me, right? It's about, it's about us here. We were talking about, some of the metaphors that could represent the voice of articulate. And I particularly like, the one that you suggested, which is, the calm in the storm, right? That's really visual. It's like, this board in the stormy waves of conversation, and somehow is able to find the eye of the storm. Why is that articulate voice, being represented in that manner?
Well, I think the classic scenario is a meeting of people in which there's disagreement.
Hmm.
And you remember, we've all been in these meetings, and everybody's holding on to their point of view, and everybody wants to be heard. And then somebody might just sit at the back of the room and might just appear to be listening, and then will come in, and when the moment is right, and she'll say, "Let me just make sure
Mm.
I understand and we understand
Mm.
what's going on here."
Mm.
And in a very simple way, in a very neutral way, an explanatory way, they will set out what it is they think they've heard. And when that's happening, for the moment, the storm will subside.
Wow.
The argument around it will subside. And that creates the much needed space for people to start to think and reflect a little more on what's going on.
Hmm.
Okay. So I think probably an important point, Kim Pong, is that timing is of the essence of this voice. So choosing the moment to bring it in, certainly in those circumstances, is really important. And also it can't be overused. I think somebody who is continuously summarizing a situation becomes a bit boring after a while. So yeah, we're all frantically arguing over something, and
Yeah.
you're able to remain completely neutral. Don't you have a point of view? What do you think? And so yeah, the worst case is that a person might be open to that particular challenge. But I think the sea and the storm, there is a sort of diplomatic quality of this as well. I recently watched a great BBC series called The Serpent. Anybody who can get hold of it, watch it. It's fantastic. And one of the principal characters is a diplomat. And it was really interesting to see how, even under pressure, this very passionate diplomat pulled himself back to a place where he just pushed the emotion out, composed himself, and then explained his thoughts or explained what he needed, rather than rushing in and demanding. And in that moment, I thought that's really interesting. This the voice to articulate the role or the persona of a diplomat. They're not a million miles away from each other. There is a sensitivity around the use of the voice.
Yeah, it almost felt that the skillful use of the articulate voice requires that discipline, the timing, that sensitivity. Just apply it, just at the right moment, right? And I just now when you're talking about the articulate voice and what it is all about, it reminded me of a personal experience here, where, we are in the office together with a team, and I can't remember what we were talking about. So I was just talking with another colleague, and we were like going back and forth, and nobody is listening to anybody, right? We're just putting in our views as to, what we want the other person to understand. And then out of the blue, a different colleague who's been observing the whole situation said, "Hey guys, let me just describe this, right, about what is happening." And she just described it, line by line, really calmly, and just stating, what she's hearing. And then she says, "Did we get this right? Did I get this right, right?" And both of us girls like, "Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what we're trying to get the other person to understand." And honestly speaking, in that moment, Kevin, I felt really stupid. Well, there's a moment of clarity, but I felt really stupid because what she did, right, was so easy. It was so masterful. It was the right timing. She was holding back the whole time, just listening to us go at it, and then at the right moment, she learned that story, she learned that recitation, that dictation, and it kind of brings everybody into the fold here. So I really, really love that piece here. Now, you have something, go for it, yeah.
Well, I'm just listening to what you're saying, Kim Pong, and I know you said, "Well, I felt so stupid," but what I think I heard was that this was a humbling experience.
It is, yeah. It is.
That's what the effect was. And, to be humble, I think, one has to move to a state where one is just much calmer. The perspective is much broader. There's a recognition that, oh, okay, maybe I didn't quite get this right.
Yeah.
And so what you've described, I think, is a really great example of the really powerful, but at some level, almost unnoticeable effect.
Yeah, it is.
That's the real power of this. I think it's an easy thing to say because, we make friends with all of the voices, and, we can have favorites. And I don't think the articulate voice is necessarily my favorite voice for a number of reasons. But I think it's the most under-considered and undervalued. And that's because it's around, it's just in the ether everywhere. But what we're doing this conversation, we're transposing it into particular contexts. And when we put it into those contexts and think about the role it's played, then it becomes really apparent just how powerful it is.
It is.
Well, I had, Kim, I had one other question for you,
sure.
Because you said earlier that in a sense your own awareness of this voice has gone up for you. It's a mid-ranking voice in your own profile. But I've heard you a couple of times, even this conversation, say, actually, I'm being more conscious in its use. I'm bringing it into play more often. And I'm imagining that's something that you didn't do before you were aware of it. So I'm interested to know what it's doing for you personally, because you're quite an influential person in any case and quite an impactful person.
Oh, wow.
So how is it helping you even more?
Well, I mean, thank you for the compliment of being the influential and the impactful person. I'm just going to take it at face value and not challenge you.
You must.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing for me, Kevin, I think the deliberate use of the articulate voice, I think what it does for me is that it slows time down for me, and it kind of turned the clock back for me. I think that's really the most visceral effect that I've experienced in intentionally deploying the articulate voice. One of my top voices is the voice of advocate. So, I mean, we're going to talk about it later on, right? And the advocate voice essentially is one that is really passionate. It's really one, of vision. And I'm like trying to get people to do what I'm telling them to do. The thing about me is that, in the past, if people kind of like ignores me or they don't get what I'm advocating, I advocate even more. And that gets really, really frustrating, right, for people. And that makes me even more frustrated. But when I realized that, hey, I could use articulate voice, as that bridge, as that glue, as that, as a calm in the storm, right? Is that all of a sudden you go like, everything kind of calms down. It allows me to think. It allows me to listen. It allows me to process. And that essentially, I think, changed the dynamics of a lot of the conversations that I have by intentionally inserting the articulate voice just at the right place, where it's needed. So yeah, that's my experience on the articulate voice.
I love this, and I think your opening gambit there was that it slows down time. I think that's what you said. It slows down time, goes back in time. I mean, I think that's a really fascinating thing. As you've heard me talk before about the nature of human language generally, which, to use a technical term, is described as fictive. We have this capability with language. We can move into the future. We can introduce people who don't exist. We can dive back into the past and recount adventures we had. This is an incredibly amazing thing that we do cognitively and with language.
Yeah.
And you've put your finger on something, a dimension of that, with respect to the voice of to articulate. And I hadn't quite thought of it that way, but that's precisely what it's doing. It is slowing time down. It's halting the rush and saying, let's just take a minute and get out of the rush to the tube, and let's just look at you over there for a minute and take it in for a second before we get back into the more rapid pace of life. I think that's a nice way of describing it.
Yeah. As you're talking about this rolling back in time, I got a new metaphor for our articulate voice, and I'll call it the Back to the Future voice. You watched the movie? Yeah, so I think it's a cool voice. It's Back to the Future. It's like, you're revisiting what's been spoken. So I think, I want to move from metaphor into persona right now. Very quickly, Kevin, what are some great personas that could be used to represent the voice of articulate?
I'll pick up two. The one we've sort of touched on, so I'll be brief on that, and that's the chairperson. So the chairperson role, listening well, summarizing, maybe bringing people in here and there, but the social glue of the summary, the clarification. I don't think I heard Kim Pong say that. I think what I heard Kim Pong say was something, but Kim Pong, what do you think? You see the way in which this just gently brings people in. But because we've talked quite a bit so far about, maybe sometimes being in conflictual situations and using the voice to articulate, to help us process that. The other big dimension is the storytelling dimension. And so example I often like to use to illustrate the voices of a documentary narrator.
Nice, I like that. Yeah.
And it's a very powerful thing. So natural history programs on the television with commentators like David Attenborough. So David Attenborough, there's this very cool, calm, explanatory voice in the background over the images that you're seeing. But it's the voice that brings the images to life. Yeah, we might see a picture of a lion traipsing across the savannah, but we've no idea what the lion is doing until we hear that sultry David Attenborough voice saying, "The lion, he's taking his time as it moves slowly across the heat of the savannah." Yeah, and suddenly you're there with the lion. You say, exactly, yes. But that's the difference. It's not the image. It's the image plus the voiceover. And actually, I think what taps into our imaginations is much more the story, the thing we're hearing, than the film, the thing we're seeing. And this is I think a really important thing, because I'm in the camp which is that there's so much data we take in when we're listening, actually much more data we're taking in when we're listening than there is when we're just looking. And that we sort of got this balance wrong. Society is so visual, we tend to focus first and hard on what we see and support that at a secondary level with what we hear. But I think the documentary format sort of gives the lie to that priority, because it comes alive with the story. Without the story, it's a random set of images.
And as you're mentioning that, I just realized this for myself, that in order for me to articulate well, I have to observe well. I have to listen well, so that I could describe what I am truly seeing and what I'm actually listening, right? So I wanna move the tempo and the temperature up a little bit, on this particular voice here. So we're gonna move it up into the accentuated, version of the voice right now. So what happens when such an amazing voice, like the articulate voice, is tuned up, blown up in its normal skillful use, right? What happens? What is the effect it has on people when we accentuate the articulate voice?
Well, you heard in everyday terms people talk about other people who, for instance, have bored them into submission. Okay, this is the person who doesn't quite know when to press the pause button. And there are quite a lot of people, and everybody has the potential in themselves at some time, and I know I do, just to keep going on. Now, often it's a consequence of excitement about the subject, but there are some people who seem to have a predilection to over-articulate. There are a number of reasons for that, but the over-articulation, which in our language we'll call to be verbose or verbosity, to just talk too much endlessly, is really, really draining on energy. Sometimes in the voices we talk about the predictable effect of the voices. If I use this verbal strategy, how generally speaking is it going to impact people? And how certain can we be that that will be the impact? Well, I don't know what your experience is, Kim Pong, but my experience is that when somebody really goes on and they don't stop and they repeat themselves, I don't think it takes more than a couple of minutes for you to see people's energy and feel people's energy just drop through the floor. It's a highly predictable effect. The interesting thing about working with people who are very high on articulation and who do move into verbosity is that they're in a sort of bind. They quite often know that they have that propensity, but they've spent a lifetime trying to deal with it and often haven't been that successful. It's quite hardwired for some people, and actually the only thing you can do about it sometimes is to be impolite and to interrupt people and to cut people and say, just stop there a minute because I've got it. Thank you. I've got it. Okay. And actually, when you talk to people who know they have this tendency, they sort of shrug their shoulders and say, fair enough,
Yeah.
I know I can do that. It's fine. Just stop when you've heard enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the real problem with it is the effect on people's energy.
Yeah, absolutely right. So if we have the articulate voice and we have the tendency of being verbose, right, in using that particular voice, what can we do to change that? For someone with the articulate voice that is, bordering on accentuation or is being accentuated, what can we do to change?
So I think you have to be firstly aware that you have the tendency. And once you're aware, I think it's a matter of some self-discipline. So I can do simple things like be clearer internally about what is the point that I want to make. And when I've made the point, pause. Okay. The second thing I can do is deliberately stop myself and check for understanding. So I'll talk, and even though I feel like I don't want to stop talking, I will stop myself and say, can I just check that I've been clear so far?
That's a good
or that you've understood.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, it's easier said than done, but it's not impossible to do.
Yeah.
It just is largely a case of practice. And the third thing I can do is to disclose my tendency and ask people to help. Hey, look, I've got a slight tendency, particularly when I get excited, because I'm really passionate about this stuff, to keep going.
Yeah.
So it's I won't be in any way offended if you just stop me. Just raise your hand if you need me to stop.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is a great thing to do, because although the first time somebody does it, they may feel a little bit awkward. Actually, once it starts to happen, it actually is a way of connecting people. So I'm being open about something I'm aware of but don't quite have full control over, and I need your help in having the control I need. Well, that's something that will bond people, not push people away from each other. It reminds me also that some people need to create airtime in order to put their ideas across.
Yeah.
So I might have something to say. And again, it might be an environment where there are a lot of people that have things to say. So rather than start to talk, soundpost what you want to say. And I know we come back to that little technique now and again. But to be able to say, guys, there are 3 points I'd like to make. I'd just like you to listen to me for a moment. 1, point 2, point 3. Thanks for listening.
Yep.
Create some space for you. So you're actually marking out a little bit of territory rather than jumping in with the flow of the conversation is going and risk being interrupted or cut off or talked over by somebody else. The way you get the voice heard is to set out the parameters in which you want the voice to be heard. I've got 3 things to say. I'd like you to listen to all 3 things before you respond.
Nice. And I just want to add on one more thing on top and above of sound posts, and I call it the sound boundaries. So essentially, you're setting the sound boundaries. And so, for example, right, if I'm amongst friends, if I'm among people that I'm comfortable with, I could say something like, hey, you know what? I think my confusion out loud here, right? So whatever I'm going to say, it may not exactly be crystal clear, but this is what I heard, this is what I've seen, and this is what I'm thinking, right? Now, very often when you kind of, put those sound boundaries up, people, by and large, they are quite willing to go with you for the ride there. So I thought that's another helpful thing that we can do in terms of the articulation voice. Yeah.
Very helpful.
Excellent.
What about the other end of the spectrum, Kim Pong? Because we can articulate in the way you've described, and the skillful use of that is really powerful. We can over articulate and become verbose.
Yeah.
We talked about the problems of that, but we also get some people some of the time fail to articulate when articulation is needed. And I wonder whether you've come across that experience before and the sort of effect that that's had.
Oh yeah, I mean, definitely. I think, and I'm not sure whether you experience a lot of this in your culture. I definitely experience a lot of this effect right in my culture. So for example, I am having a meeting with some people, and I I say certain things and I say, so, what are your thoughts, right? And then there's like dead silence, right? It's like nobody dares to kind of raise a pip, about what they have just heard. And, the truth is this: people actually heard what, I have said. People actually are interested in what I'm saying. But I think for some cultural, maybe dispositions or reasons, they chose to keep quiet. But if I don't understand that, I may feel that, those people that I'm talking to, they're either not interested in what I'm doing here, or they're just staying on the peripheral of the conversation. That there's no sense of, getting into the conversation. There's no sense of, becoming co-owners in this conversation, that we are having. So that's been my experience. I'm not sure how's that like, in your part of the world.
Yeah, well, I think, well, this is a very, very broad generalization. I think maybe in the West, people are trying to just, jump in with plenty to say a little more. But who knows? I think it varies a lot between individuals as well as across cultures. But I think the word you use there, peripheral, somebody not using the voice at a time when the voice is needed is really a missed opportunity for influence.
It is.
So, think about it this way. Everybody wants to have influence. Who's going to turn down the opportunity to have influence? Very few people will turn that down. And, it's such a simple thing to do. All I've got to do to have influence is effectively to demonstrate that I've listened to and followed and observed, to use your important word, the conversation that's been going on around me. And suddenly people look at me and say, wow, that's really interesting. They are actually in tune here with what's going on. And they're not peripheral to the discussion. They're not on the margin of what's going on. They may not have said so much in the course of this conversation, but they're clearly in tune with it. They're clearly keeping up with it. So, well, this is great. And immediately the person has some influence. When they now come on to say something, maybe they put forward their own point of view, then that's likely to be heard much more seriously, taken much more seriously than it might otherwise would, just as a unique one-off contribution. So there's a risk here for individuals who don't use the voice and in the moment that it's needed, that they end up being perceived as peripheral to the discussion. It's a lost opportunity, really.
It is. I love the way you describe it, and I often tell people that when voice is needed and silence prevails, bad things happens, right? So it's really true. It's like hey, I think the articulate voice is the voice of influence, and when we use that skillfully, I think it connects with people, and I think it like you say, because time slows down, right? It relaxes people. And there's this sense of trust. There's this sense, perhaps even about camaraderie or even alignment in whatever we are talking, and just make the whole conversation a whole lot more aligned, engaging. And that we are all together in this. It's not a monologue, but it is actually a dialogue, between people here. So I'm watching time here, Kevin, and I want to just ask one final question here. And once again, we're going to tap into the genius mind of the creator himself. Right. And
where is he?
Yeah, where is he? My gosh, he's right in front of me. Well, if you allow me to do this, right, he's right in front of me. That's where he is. So the question is this, Kevin. The question is, so what are your best advice? What are your best tips, for people who wants to skillfully use the voice of articulate?
I would say, listen first, think clearly about what you want to say, and then don't hesitate in saying it.
Okay. Is that it?
Okay. That's it. I'm actually going to repeat it because I think it's important. I think it's listen first, then think clearly, having heard what I've heard, what I want to say, and then without hesitation, say it. Okay, listen so first. You see that sequence of things through.
So let me just say that again. Listen first, think clearly, and that without hesitation, say it.
Say it. Exactly right.
That is great advice. And with that,
Okay.
we're gonna end the time right now. And for every one of you out there, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I thoroughly did. So do remember, subscribe to the channel. Click the bell. If you want us to send a notification to you every time we post the episode. And once again, you're listening to Own Your Conversation series, and all the information about where to do the assessments, all the information about SOUNDWAVE and all the other episodes, they're all in the links in the description boxes here. So, with that, ladies and gentlemen, I think we are done for today. Kevin, thank you for your time. Once again, great pleasure. I learned so much just talking with you today. I just hope you have a great day.
And you. Okay,
All
see
right.
you all again.
All right, take care. Ta-da.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.